What is happening? I feel like my brain just shut off.
It's a glitch in the Matrix.
Seriously, I feel like my brain just went like,
You notice how like the news outlets, almost anything you look at, it's calling these protests in Germany a quote far right movement.
I'm Stephanie Keith.
And I am Tara Manjekovic, and we are unapologetically outspoken.
Hey everyone, happy Wednesday. All right, so before we get into our main topic for today, I've got to mention the news going on because the Iowa caucus, we know that was going on, and no surprise, Trump won by a landslide. So what I didn't realize, though, that I just heard this morning on the Morning Wire podcast is that Vivek has dropped out from the race and called Trump and gave him his full endorsement. And Tara, I think that was actually a really smart move on his part. What do you think?
Oh, definitely. And I think that's awesome.
I was disappointed, over the last few days because I know Trump had posted something about Vivek and how he's not really, MAGA, and voting for him isn't to vote for MAGA and all this stuff. And so I was like, man, like I thought they were going to pair up somehow, maybe Vivek would be in his cabinet if he gets elected. So I think it was smart, and he's, I think made amends with Trump. And then everyone was thinking Nikki Haley would be like second, but it was actually DeSantis, which really surprised me.
See, that surprises me too, because I really feel like the Democrats are pushing for Nikki Haley. And
Oh,
so
100%.
yeah, so I think like there's something a little fishy going on there. And
Hmm.
like Vivek has been in Trump's corner from day one, even as his
Yeah.
opponent. He's never talked shit. He's always been super supportive of Trump. So it's just a classy move what he did. And it just makes me like him even more.
Oh, I agree. I think he's great. And I've said from the beginning, I think he would be a great cabinet member. Like I would put him in charge of um maybe the Department of Education. Like I really like what he has said that he would do in terms of like our education system, but really like there's so many things this guy would be great at. He's a successful businessman. So I hope that Trump considers it. We'll see. Now they're going to be going to New Hampshire for like the same thing. And that is where people tend to be more moderate. So they think that Nikki Haley is gonna, kind of shine there. So we'll see. But I still think, like, even in New Hampshire, I don't know. I think Trump's gonna come out ahead, but we'll see.
Well, let's hope so.
Yeah. So today's topic, we're not even talking about the United States, we're talking about Germany. And this really got my attention partly because you just don't hear about it a whole lot on the mainstream news here. But there is like a whole protest going on with the farmers in Germany. And it really reminded me a lot of what was happening with the Danish farmers that we talked about last year. So the farmers in Germany are outraged because the government was trying to raise taxes on them and take away tax rebates. So they ended up taking to the streets of Berlin to protest. And the photos and the videos online, you guys, like crazy. I mean, it
Yeah.
makes you want to jump up and down. Like, good for these people. They went all out. But the Telegraph reported on this. They said that tractors were lining up outside of Berlin's Brandenburg Gate, and over 1,000 lined up on a single stretch of motorway outside of the city of Mainz. Mainz. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Mainz, maybe,
I think it's
but
Maine.
Mainz. So police are also investigating the piles of dung that were left outside the offices of main coalition parties, including Chancellor Olaf Scholz's center-left SDP party. Farmers warned that these policies will kill German farming and food will have to be imported. And again, like that reminds me of a lot of the things we've talked about here in the United States with the farmland. So according to Reuters, quote, the protests have heaped pressure on Chancellor Olaf Scholz's coalition as it struggles to fix a budget mess and contain, quote, right-wing forces. Tara, like, notice how we're seeing this trend where more and more people are getting fed up with these extreme left agendas and are starting to lean right. And like the government and the media immediately demonizes the right and they make it seem like it's some crazy right extremist agenda. And I thought that this was, oh my God, why am I like blanking? What is happening? I feel like my brain just shut off. I'll edit that part out.
It's a glitch in the matrix.
Seriously, I feel like my brain just went like, okay, I'll edit that out. Don't worry.
No, it's
Um,
funny. You should leave it in.
I don't know. So anyhow, I thought it was just here, but you have this happening in Germany, France, Denmark, and Italy. And remember, the Danish farmers, like I talked about, they ended up forming their own political party and becoming the majority in parliament. And then you have Italy's new prime minister, Giorgia Meloni, and she's the most far right that they've had since the war. And then France, there's been like all of those protests. And at one point, they actually took over the BlackRock headquarters. And then, a couple years ago, we have the Canadian truckers protest. So I think that this speaks to a larger movement of people waking up to the real agenda of these left wing policies. And what the media claims is far right is really just getting back to normal, like normal common sense policies before all of the woke DEI craziness came in. So, anyhow, what the German farmers are doing is apparently working because the government has already decided to keep the tax rebate on new agricultural vehicles and spread the removal of the agriculture diesel tax subsidy over several years. And honestly, like, I wish we had these protests here. I think instead of having China take up the farmland, maybe the farmers here should start to protest. But nope, we have China and BlackRock that are buying up all of our farmland.
Yeah, and it's like you said, you notice how like the news outlets, almost anything you look at, it's calling these protests in Germany a quote far right movement. I mean, that sounds so familiar to how people in America who either believe in MAGA, or even if you don't want to call it MAGA, but people who believe in an America first agenda, what are we called? Far right extremists. And in reality, we're not extremists at all. We just want the freedoms and the type of government that our country was founded on. And I read an article in BBC News yesterday that kind of portrayed this perfectly, how the media is taking all of this. And the BBC is essentially like bought and paid for by the World Economic Forum and the elites, just like most of our mainstream media is in the States. And yesterday, here's what they published. It said, quote, as farmers blockade roads over planned subsidy cuts, there have been numerous reports of neo-Nazi or monarchist groups turning up at rallies. Telegram channels reveal fervent posts about hopes of an emerging mass resistance that could help dismantle the government. But Chancellor Scholz warned this week that extremists were using social media to poison democratic debate, as he described any talk of uprisings as dangerous nonsense, end quote. And then I read another article in DPA International, and it quoted Schlotz as saying, quote, if protests that are legitimate turn into fury or disregard for the democratic processes and institutions, we all lose. Only those who despise democracy will benefit, end quote. So, like, totally familiar rhetoric, right? This is just like the shit that Biden says about threats to democracy. And it's like we say this all the time. Protests are only a threat to democracy when they come from your everyday working class citizen who just wants to provide for their family, keep their businesses afloat, right? It's not a threat to democracy when it's an actual violent extremist group or a group affiliated with terrorists. And of course, Olaf Scholz is a ranking member of the World Economic Forum, and he's part of this whole one world government agenda. And according to God, I'm trying to say Biden and Guardian at the same time. According to the Guardian, very similar with what's happening in the United States with Biden, Schlotz's approval ratings with the German people is at an all-time low. There was a recent poll indicating that 64% of Germans want to see a change in government. And this is all because of the same things we're experiencing in the States. The economy, rising inflation, people being unhappy with Germany funding the war in Ukraine while the German people are suffering at home. Like, totally familiar, right? And this Guardian article also pointed out that it's not just the farmers who've been protesting. You've had railway workers had a strike last week that brought transportation to a standstill. Metal workers and public sector employees and educators all staged walkouts in December. And basically, people are sick of the shit and they're sick of their governments purposely destroying their countries for the global agenda.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, it sounds like there's just one global agenda, a one world government in place, and people are waking up to it. And you mentioned Olaf Scholz is a ranking member of the WEF, and that's what's so concerning about the WEF. So I don't want to get too off topic, but I think it's important to point out, like, this is not just a group of elites holding meetings. They are grooming the future leaders of the world. And the woke Prime Minister of Canada, for example, Justin Trudeau, he was part of the World Economic Forum's Young Leaders Program. Vladimir Putin, Angela Merkel, Bill Gates, Chelsea Clinton, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, Larry Page, they are all alumni of the program. And obviously, they're all shaping the world that we currently live in. And I'm sure they've got a whole group lined up for future takeover of the world. So, like, they're literally controlling every facet of life through their programs and through these alumni. And we're just sitting around and letting it happen. So I'm glad Germany's doing something about it. I wish we would.
Yeah. And like you just brought up, Bill Gates, right? Because when it comes to farming, who's the largest private landowner in the United States? Fucking Bill Gates. He owns more than 270,000 acres of farmland in America, but he has a very clear and outspoken climate change agenda to get rid of farming, get rid of cattle and chickens. And his foundation funds companies that are developing insect based foods and lab grown meats. So, what does he need all this farming land for, right? And who else does Bill Gates work with? He works with China. And it's like we just mentioned on Monday how it was only recently discovered that Chen Tianqiao, the CEO of a global investment firm who's a member of the CCP, purchased 200,000 acres of farming land in Oregon that nobody knew about until tax records were revealed last week. And I would place bets that Bill Gates certainly knew about it because according to the Washington Times, like he has funded several CCP organizations who are recipients of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, including the Chinese National Health Commission, the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Affairs of the People's Republic of China, and several universities in China that are helping to advance the CCP's military. So, do you really think that we aren't going to have issues in America with our own food supply and our government screwing over farmers as part of this whole one world global agenda? And I want to mention too, like, if you think farmers shouldn't be getting subsidies, I would rather see farmers get subsidies than big pharma and the banking industry and all of the unethical elites and companies and corporations that are running the world. And for all the climate change extremists who want to get rid of diesel and fossil fuels and farming, and you think cows are destroying the planet with their farts and methane, like you need to open your eyes to the truth of what's happening here because none of this has to do with climate change. It's about control. And like that's exactly where the American people need to wake the fuck up because you look at what's happening in Germany and then you look at us here. I think we are still too comfortable as a whole to take action. Like, who's out there protesting in America? It's the violent extremist left wing groups, the angry, brainwashed youth. It's not the conservatives or the working class or the normal citizens. Because, number one, it just hasn't gotten uncomfortable enough yet for people who need to be standing up to actually stand up. Because, yes, there's inflation, but people can still feed their families and they go to work every day and they live their lives, right? So, we just haven't reached that collective breaking point where good people say, fuck being a Democrat or a Republican or whatever other party or cause you identify or affiliate with, because we all just need to come together as Americans to stand up for freedom. And I really feel like by the time we do, it's going to be too late. And one of the German protesters is a 20-year-old crop farmer named Henrik Borstling. And she said what everyone else needs to be thinking. She said, quote, if I had to describe in one word why I'm here, then it would be future. I want my children to be able to become farmers one day. I want to be able to take over the farm from my father. I want to be able to run it properly and invest in my business, end quote. And I think that's the mindset that every American needs to have, like standing up for your future, standing up for what's right for your family, not waiting in the wings for someone else to fix things. And I know I go on these rants all the time, but the only way we will ever fix anything in our country is to drop identity politics and come together as Americans.
Oh, I agree. And honestly, like I think that's why that there's this push constantly to ban TikTok because I think that's where people are coming together, not just as Americans, but the whole world. And like, they keep saying, "Oh, it's because it's Chinese owned." But I mean, come on. Look at how many other companies are Chinese owned that we use every day that they don't have a problem with. And, it's because information is spreading like wildfire. For example, when France was protesting for months and taking over BlackRock headquarters, there was hardly any word of it here in America. And there was this whole thing going around that if you went on Instagram or Facebook and typed in France, you would see all these pretty influencer type photos. But when you typed in France on TikTok, you saw protests, fights with the police, and mass chaos. And since I've been on TikTok, like it's opened my eyes to so much information that I had never seen before because it's censored by every American outlet. And, I think it's because of apps like this that are helping us communicate that people are waking up to the bullshit. But the question is, and this comes up all the time in people posting, is when will enough be enough? Like, when are we going to start taking action here in America?
Yeah. And I think it's exactly what I just said. It's like it hasn't gotten as bad in America as it has in certain areas of Europe. Or remember last year when all of the shit was going on in China with the lockdowns that nobody knew about, but you were only seeing it on TikTok. Again, you
Mhm.
weren't seeing it on mainstream media. And there has to be a large percentage of the population that takes action together. If you look at these protests in Germany, their efforts are producing results. Like these farming protests started over a week ago on January 8th. And 2 days ago, they had over 5,000 tractors take over the city. Thousands and thousands of people marching. I mean, like you said, the photos and the videos, it looks fucking awesome to see all these tractors on the city streets. And it's like you mentioned in the beginning of the podcast, these rallies have resulted in the government walking back some of the reductions and promising to reinstate partial vehicle tax discounts and phase out the subsidy over several years instead of getting rid of it immediately, which was their initial plan. So that's at least a minor win. But the people know that it's a temporary fix, and there needs to be a complete government overhaul, just like we need in the United States. And the only way we're ever going to do that is with American solidarity and an America First agenda.
Well, yeah, and I think that what gives me a lot of hope is the whole thing with the Danish farmers again, taking over parliament. They got organized, created their own political party, and now they're the majority there. And, the far right new prime minister, Giorgia Meloni in Italy, that's a sign again for me that people are hungry for change. They're tired of this woke bullshit. And the media, is going to keep trying their hardest to paint this picture of, this emergence of right-winged people that are extremists and white supremacists. But again, like the reality is this is just normal people. It's normal people with common sense that are far more moderate than most traditional Republicans and really just want the government to stop the wars, stop the corruption, give us our freedom back to live our lives how we want to live them. And that's it. It's not some crazy right wing conspiracy. It's just normal people.
No, it's only right wing because the government is fearing losing control. And the way they do that is with mainstream media and painting all of us as fucking domestic terrorists and extremists. And earlier, we brought up the World Economic Forum. And I want to mention this because the annual meeting in Davos just started on Monday. And it goes on all week and ends this Friday. So, right now, you have all the rich and powerful elite from across the world who are currently in Switzerland, and they're all discussing how they're going to continue trying to destroy individual countries and create a one world government. And there are reportedly somewhere around 3,000 world leaders attending this year and over 500 journalists. And this year's meeting is expected to be the most critical year so far. And World Economic Forum organizers are calling it, quote, the most complicated geopolitical and geoeconomic backdrop of the last few decades, end quote. Obviously referring to inflation and economic stability across the globe, the continuing war in Ukraine, conflicts in the Middle East. So this year, they've ramped up security more than ever to protect the elites. Why? Because people are fucking pissed. And according to an article that I read in Business Standard, the Swiss Army has deployed over 5,000 personnel. They have undercover and uniformed personnel, snipers, drone jammers. In addition to the Army, there's a huge support staff of police that's going to be there until January 25th. The Air Force is monitoring and securing airspace. They're restricting airspace within a radius of 25 nautical miles from the center of Davos. And the Swiss Air Force is going to be using military helicopters as VIP transport for high-ranking officials like presidents and members of foreign governments, including the heads of the UN and the European Union. And reportedly, there are over more than 200 internationally protected persons, including 60 heads of state and 40 foreign ministers who are attending this year's meeting. And what is the theme this year, Stephanie? It's called Building Trust. How fucking ironic is that?
That is laughable. Oh my God, laughable.
Exactly. Yeah. And from what I read, like there's no official Russian delegates there this year, similar to last year, because Switzerland's very much in support of Zelensky in Ukraine. But China has sent some very high level delegates this year, including executives of some very high level influential Chinese companies. So we're definitely going to be giving everyone an update on the outcome of the forum, even though we know the agenda that really matters is going to stay behind closed doors, and they're only going to tell us what they want us to know. But this is a really important year for the World Economic Forum because elections will be taking place in over 50 countries in 2024. It's not just the United States, it's happening all over the world. And I was reading in a periodical called swissinfo.ch. They're reporting that one of the biggest discussions expected to take place at the forum, it's concern about, quote, the spread of misinformation and disinformation fueling social unrest and threatening democracy, end quote. So again, this basically means people are waking up to the truth. So if you've been too afraid or too complacent or too lazy to speak up, like you need to fucking do it now. Spread the message, share the podcast, stand up for yourself, stand up for your freedom. Like we've been saying this for over a year now. But this year, 2024, is going to be the most critical year of our lives in terms of our freedom.
That's crazy. I mean, that completely could reshape the world if you have 50
Yeah.
countries and all these people. It's not just the United States and the MAGA movement. This is all over the world. People are realizing what's happening here. And yeah, they're going to be plotting. They're not sharing information. They are going to be plotting on how to censor us. And
Yeah.
I think it's a great point. Like share this information. And sometimes it's difficult, like having these conversations or wording things. You could share a podcast, let people seek it themselves, let them listen to multiple episodes and start to at least plant that seed that wakes them up to all of the BS that's been happening. Because it's like once you have that, that first thing that kind of wakes you up, you start to see the big picture and realize we've been lied to. We are being completely conditioned and controlled. And, their plots are no longer working. So I cannot wait to do this World Economic Forum episode. I say that, in a terrified way because it's like I know there's going to be some crazy stuff. But it'll give us something to talk about. So
Yeah.
we'll keep everyone posted. But thanks everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you back here Friday. If you're sick of all the crazy shit going on in our country and you want to express your support and patriotism for the show, head on over to our Etsy store at UO Patriot Chicks and check out our new stickers. The link can also be found on our website. If you love the show and you want exclusive episodes, support the podcast and join the conversation by becoming a member of our Patreon community. We'll be posting weekly member-only podcast episodes and content that isn't available on the weekly podcast. Every Patreon member will also get a free Unapologetically Outspoken sticker and updates about our new sticker release before they're made public. And be sure to follow us on TikTok at Unapologetically Outspoken. And if you haven't done so already, please rate and review the podcast. The more you support us, the more people we can reach. So help us spread the word.